Thanks so much for joining us in here on Valley News Now's digital desk, coming out on Facebook Live. I'm Gabriel Ostler here on the anniversary, or the birthday, we just call them birthdays, we don't have to call them anniversaries, of a Fargo legend being born. Roger Maris was born on this day 90 years ago. Tragically, Roger, of course, left us a while ago. He died at the age of 51, but he definitely still cuts a large figure in Fargo history in general, especially sports history. Probably the greatest athlete to ever come out of the area, especially with such deep local roots coming from Shanley High School and really being connected to the region. So in order to deep dive on what made Roger special, his life, his career, his post-playing activities, I was lucky enough to get in contact with Danny Peary, who's the author of a pretty quintessential Roger Maris biography, and he joins us now on the digital desk to talk about this topic. Danny, how's everything going?
Pretty good. I'm here in Sag Harbor, Long Island, New York, but I have been to Fargo, and I'm happy. I'm really happy to speak to somebody from Fargo on the 90th birthday. Isn't that amazing? How long ago
Yeah, it's
he would be? He'd be 90. He could still be alive. It's really
yeah,
a
it is one of
shame
those
that
things where
we
he
can.
absolutely could be, and it's not even, oh, we just missed him by a couple of years. I mean, he was still pretty
Yeah.
much in the prime of life at 51 when cancer took him. So it is one of those sad things of like, yeah, we could have had a lot more time with him, a lot more stories to tell, but luckily we have guys like you who are experts in the field, and we can talk about it at length in this
Well,
way.
51 years. He died at 51, but he had quite an amazing legacy
Sure
in that
did.
brief time.
So I really want to go back to the beginning on this one because he has such strong local ties. I mentioned, obviously, he went to Fargo High School and then transferred over to Shanley, both of those in Fargo. So he lived here for quite a time, then played in the minors his first season with the Fargo Moorhead minor league team. But this goes all the way back, the Maris family moving to Grand Forks back in 1938, then Fargo in 1946. This is well before the military base, the Air Force Base, came to Grand Forks, so these are not extremely developed areas. I was just wondering if you could paint kind of a picture of the Maris family life. I know he had an older brother who got polio at one point. His parents may have had something of a tumultuous relationship. So what was the kind of the
Oh, they
day-to-day
did.
life for a family back then?
Well, actually, Roger, during his baseball career, would say he was born in Fargo, which is very interesting because he kind of didn't want anybody to know about his previous life. Not necessarily his life, but his, like you mentioned, the tumultuous relationship of his parents. He was actually born outside of Hibbing, Minnesota, which people know of for Kevin McHale and Bob Dylan. Um, and he was in not in Hibbing proper, but in Leetonia, which was a mining site. And he was born into a little wood house with sloped roofs, so you had to walk through the middle of the house so you wouldn't bang your head. Had no hot water. They had an outhouse. There's the whole neighborhood had wildlife running through it, so there were pigs and goats and cows and wild children. And that's where he started. The two boys, Roger, and you mentioned his older brother, Rudy Jr., who we called Buddy, who was the older kid, and the two kids were inseparable for much of their childhoods, including then when it was them against the world. And the parents, Rudy and Connie, married very young, and there was all these family problems, partly because Rudy's family, or it's Croatian, thought that Connie was Serbian, even though she might not have been. But and also instead of being Catholic, she's from the Eastern Orthodox Church, and they treated her miserably and created a schism that would last Roger's entire life. There's a family feud that went on, and they were part of the secrecy that Roger Maris always had, talking to the press and saying he was from Fargo. is because he didn't want to talk about the parents and the background. And not only I mentioned the schism, but in the family, but they didn't get along, the parents ever. And she would find other men, and she was known as a carouser. And Rudy Sr. worked on the railroad, the Great Northern Railroad, and he would work there his entire life. But in order to get his wife away from these other men, he would move. And the first place they moved was to Grand Forks.
And I was wondering, when you talk about the schism between the families, something I didn't know before I really delved into research for today is that Maris is not the original spelling of his last name. It was Maras. And they changed it in 1960 ish when Roger was about 21 already. Oh, no, they got divorced in
Well, and
1960.
he was still in the minor leagues. I think it was like either 1955 or 1956.
Right.
You use the word they, and that's what's really important here. Maris had when he was in the minor leagues, whatever minor league team he was on, and I think he was playing in Reading at the time, a minor league team in the Indians organization. Um, when he went on the road, he was called Maras, and he didn't like that. So he changed his name to Maris, Maris, but part of the reason was probably because he wanted to disassociate himself from the Maris clan that was always mean to his mother, Connie. And the interesting thing is that his entire family then went and changed their name from Maras, Maras, to Maris. So it'd be that way. But I think it was basically Connie snubbing her nose at the people who were getting back in Hibbing, who were getting reflected glory from what Roger was accomplishing in baseball. And she didn't want that. She wanted it only for her side of the family. So that's when Maris changed his name and became Roger Maris.
Well, that's one of the many reasons why I wanted to have you on, because that's invaluable correction there and really shows he's leading the charge on this front. I thought it was kind of interesting that his parents would do something and then he would adopt it as a 21-year-old, but that makes much more sense that he's actually the
He
one
would
who's doing
even
it.
people from all through his career, people from Hibbing would like, hey, I have a cousin who plays Major League Baseball, and I'm one of the MARAS people, and let's go to the ballpark, and I'll call Roger. And they call Roger over, and he walk right past them, and he'd snub them, he'd give them the finger. He was on the side of his mother on this, and so it went on his entire life. But he would never talk to reporters about it, and of course, all the reporters, including me, if I were at that time a journalist, I would have wanted to know what's the background of your family. Why are you treating you Roger Maris, who is known probably as maybe the nicest guy in baseball, the calmest, the sweetest, beloved by your teammates and anybody who knows you well. Why are you treating the Maris clan so shabbily? So it was part of his secret. Being a Midwestern, also from Minnesota and from North Dakota, he wanted his privacy, and that's really where I think the privacy began, in his secrecy and his conflict with the press, because he didn't want to tell them what happened in the past regarding his mother, basically.
Well, before we get more into his relationship with the press, especially during the record breaking season and how that may have affected his Hall of Fame candidacy, I mean, that's at least something that some people put forward. I just want to touch one more time before we get to the pros on his life in Fargo and how he was this incredible multi sport athlete once he transferred over to Shanley. I wasn't sure if it was the state record or the national record, but he had 4 return touchdowns in one football game when he was playing for Shanley. So he was big active on the football team as well as the baseball team. Was there ever any inclination that he could have pursued professional athletics in another capacity outside of baseball? Or was it just, at the time you're a good athlete, you're going to play a lot of sports?
Well, the interesting thing is Roger didn't like baseball at first. His brother Rudy Sr. was considered the great athlete in the family, and Roger went along with that. His father, Rudy Sr., would always say how I mentioned Roger Jr. Roger Jr. was such a great athlete, even better than Roger. And you mentioned he got polio at one point, but they played together first off at Fargo Central High. They played in all the sports together. Roger had developed a love for baseball, and he was really great at his American Legion. He'd always play on teams with his older brother. His older brother would excel, but in doing the research for the book, I was noticing there was Roger game after game in baseball and in his other sport that you asked about. He was played basketball. He was pretty good, but he was a great football player, and he was recruited to go to the University of Oklahoma, and he actually went there and spent like 10 days there before realizing that wasn't for me. He would have played with Bud Wilkinson, and if people look back in the 1950s, Bud Wilkinson was the coach of a team that won 47 consecutive games and a couple of national championships. So Roger would have been part of that team. He was that good. But anyway, the first year, he and Rudy Jr., his brother, played on Fargo Central, and the coach didn't like either of them. So he put Rudy Jr. on the bench and didn't play, and he got rid of Roger. And so they actually, this is interesting. Rudy Jr. went to the coach and said, "If you don't play us, we're going to change high schools." And the coach called his bluff, and they changed high schools. They went to Bishop Shanley High School, and they became superstars. That coach got fired because of this, and it apparently divided the whole town. This is a big deal. These the two brothers, Maris at the time, were superstars. What happened was Rudy Jr. graduated after his senior year, and then Roger became the star of the team. And you mentioned 4 touchdowns. It was the coach exaggerated what he did, but he actually did something better than that. He scored 5 touchdowns. He scored. The coach wanted him to say have the record for returning 4 kickoffs for touchdowns in one game, which would have been the high school record. He actually had 2 touchdowns on kickoff returns, 1 on a punt return, 1 on an interception, and 1 on a run from scrimmage. So 5 touchdowns, and that's why Oklahoma wanted him to come to be a Sooner and play in the backfield there and be a superstar. But by this time, he liked baseball, and he was excelling in the American Legion, telling his friends, "I'm going to be a pro baseball player," and they laughed at him. And then the coach, a scout from the Indians, saw him, same scout who discovered Bob Feller back in the 1930s, and he signed. He after coming back from Oklahoma, he signed to play baseball.
And for all you Bud Wilkinson historians out there, remember him, please, for the Oklahoma Sooners era and not for the 2 years he spent with the St. Louis football Cardinals in the NFL, because that was one of the more...
Not the same success.
one of the more inglorious late career footnotes for a really legendary individual. But, okay, so that's really good to know, especially correcting the record on specifically how many touchdowns, because you're right, that is definitely more impressive. But... now we're moving into pro, when he is signed by the Indians organization, and then he really rises to national prominence, of course, when he dons the Yankees uniform. But people who don't maybe know the nitty-gritty don't remember that not only was he in Cleveland first, he was with the Kansas City Athletics, and then he ended up in New York. And one of my favorite chapters in baseball history is this extremely weird late 50s relationship between Kansas City and New York, where people are calling them New York's major league farm team. And there's a host of suspicious trades that get done during that time. I remember Billy Martin gets traded to Kansas City as punishment, and he breaks down crying immediately after he hears that news. But Roger gets swapped for Don Larson and a couple other people. Talk to me about that relationship between the two organizations and how Roger ended up in such a high pressure market as New York.
Okay, it's circuitous, but basically, I was an A's fan at the time and not liking it all because they were considered the minor league team for the Yankees, even though they were supposedly a major league team. Roger signed as we mentioned, signed with the Indians. He played a year and a half. The general manager came in, um, and says Frank Trader Lane, and we would eventually trade away all 40 players who were on the roster. When Rogers said he didn't want to go to Winter League ball to improve his play, which Frank Lane wanted, Frank Lane was determined to trade him. He didn't like, Frank Lane hated the Yankees, so he had to find another team to trade to, and he made the trade to the Kansas City Athletics with a stipulation that Roger could not go to the Yankees, who wanted him even back then for a year and a half. Now, the relationship with you were talking about between the Philadelphia Athletics and then what they moved to Kansas City. They were bought by a guy named Arnold Johnson. And Arnold Johnson and Park Carroll, who was a reporter, they would run the team. Now, they were both obligated to the Yankees because Del Webb, one of the two owners, ran a construction company, uh, got the job of reconstructing the Kansas City Blues Stadium from 18,000 to whatever, 35, 50,000 people in a very short time. So he was already under obligation to Del Webb. And also Del Webb took a second mortgage on Municipal Stadium, which was the new stadium. So we had that hanging over the head of Arnold Johnson and PM Park Carroll. And so whenever the Yankees wanted a player, and usually late in the season, and they just dipped down into the Athletics roster, see who was really good, and they would grab them. Usually at the end of the season, they got Maris in a deal in December 1959. Maris was going to be traded to the Yankees. That was what was going to happen. And they got back like Norm Seaburn and Hank Bauer and Jerry Lumpy, and he came in maybe earlier, but and Roger Maris and Joe DeMaestri, the shortstop, went to the Yankees. And when I always talk about why Roger Maris should be in the Hall of Fame, I always use a different statistic. And this statistic nobody ever pays attention to. Two times, Roger Maris went to a third place team, and that team started to win championships. He was the only big addition to the Yankees, and they won 5 straight with Roger Maris in right field. And later on in 1967, he went to the Cardinals, and they won 2 straight National League pennants and 1 World Series. So that's a statistic nobody pays attention to, along with he was in more World Series than any other player in the 1960s.
And before I get to your next question, if you could just do me a favor and bop the monitor down just a little bit because we're a little bit low on you. Perfect, right there. And that leads actually exactly into what I wanted to ask you next, because we've had a lot of coverage on the home run chase, and there's, you know, literally an entire feature film based on all of the stuff that happened at that time. But something that I don't know, and is now I have the chance to ask you about this, is he finished up his playing career at 34 years old, which is not young, but there are definitely players that have played longer. And in that World Series win that you mentioned in '67, he hit 385 during that World Series. It's mentioned as one of his greater World Series performances. So why did he end up not playing more after that? Was he experiencing some physical problems that I don't know about? Was he burned out on his love for the game? Did management of various rosters not think he had anything left to contribute? Why did his playing career come to an end when it did?
Well, he's actually going to retire after the 1966 season. His last year with the Yankees, and he told general manager Ralph Hank, "Whatever you do, don't trade me because I'm going to retire. I just want to announce it at the right time." And of course, Ralph Hank traded him. He didn't know whether to go to St. Louis or not. This is after a couple of years of bad injuries, including a hamate bone that prevented him from gripping the bat well for 2 years, and he would get his private X-rays done in New York, and finally found that that was what was going on. And meanwhile, the Yankees kept telling the fans, "It's up to Roger if he wants to play today. It's he seems okay to us." But it turned out they had seen an X-ray and they knew something was wrong with him. So he hated the Yankees. He wanted to quit the Yankees, and it was being written up in Yankee in New York 11 newspapers at the time that Maris was going to quit because he was so upset that the Yankees had traded him. He only wanted to play with the Yankees. So he didn't like that. So, and he also loved Stan Musial, who was the GM, became the GM of the Cardinals. And Musial and Maris got together, and Maris didn't want to look like he only wanted to play with the Yankees, who he detested at that point. So he agreed to play another year with the Cardinals, and he had a great year. And the fans, who had been so awful to him in New York for the last several years, thinking he was, collecting his paycheck, even though he was sitting on the bench pretending to be injured. The fans loved him, and he got to play the style of play he always was. He was actually not a home run hitter, but a line drive hitter who had a couple of years where he hit a lot of home runs. And they loved the way he played and hustled and fielded, and he had a lot of clutch hits. But he was going to retire after that year. Played 1 year. Then I worked with Tim McCarver, who was a catcher of the Cardinals at the time, and I worked with him for 30 years, writing books and on his TV show. And he confided in me, McCarver did, that he was sitting at a bar after they had won the World Series in 1967. Yeah, I forgot what player he was sitting with. But he, at the other end of the bar, was the Cardinals owner, Gussie Busch, and talking to Maris. Now, McCarver says he didn't think Maris was going to retire after enjoying the season so much, but Maris wasn't going to tell Busch that. And so Busch said, "I want you to play another year. And if you have a really good year, I'll give you what you've always wanted, which is a beer distribution center in Florida." And Maris really wanted that, to do that with his older brother. And but he said, "No, I'm not gonna do it under those terms. But if you want me to play another year, you just give me the distributorship." And he did. Busch agreed. Mayor Carver said this is the greatest negotiation in the history of baseball, because he made millions and millions of dollars getting this distributorship to play one more season. And then he played one more season and retired.
That is very shrewd negotiating, and then also great to know that, yeah, he was really kind of suffering with the injuries and kind of wanted to go out on his own
Terrible
terms,
injuries.
but then did get a nice deal
He
and set
actually
himself
got
up.
injured. This People don't know this. Back when he was on the Athletics, somebody came down on his, Billy Gardner, I think, came down on his rib cage with two knees on sliding when he slid into second base. And for the rest of his career, he had bad ribs. He couldn't sleep on his stomach anymore, which I guess he used to do. But so he always suffered that. But he got more and more injuries as years went on, and injuries, coming back from injuries too soon. He had an appendectomy in Kansas City, messing up 1 year, and his annual slumps, and that's what kept his stats down. He'd be leading the league at hitting in Kansas City at the All-Star break, and he was like the greatest player in the league. And then he went into a 6 for 106 slump coming back from an injury too soon. So this is what always hurt him in the statistic department when people say he never hit 300, but he hit 300 for most of the season, and then he had these terrible slumps. So too bad. But
Well, since I've asked you so many things about his life and you have known exactly what I'm talking about, I'll go ahead and throw this one out as well, where I know that he did run that distributorship with his brother for a little while, and then he passed away actually in Texas. But if people don't know, his body is interred in a cemetery in Fargo. So is that a decision that he made? That his family made, or did they know that they were going to do that before he passed away? And what caused him to make that decision? Did he always just view Fargo as his hometown?
yeah, he loved Kansas City, and he didn't really want to come to New York because he loved Kansas City. But as Pat Maris, his wife, said, that's always where we considered home, Fargo. And they had, and in fact, the year before Maris passed away, they bought a plot in the Holy Cross Cemetery. Is that the name of the cemetery there? But where he is buried. And so it was a year. It was his decision, and Pat said there was actually, no decision that we were going to be buried in Fargo because that's really where our people are and where our home is. So Fargo is always the destination.
All right. Well, that answers that. And then to sum everything up, I know you kind of tipped your hand a little bit when you mentioned the stats that you have for his
Should
Hall
be
of
in the
Fame
Hall of
candidacy.
Fame.
One more time.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, he should be in the Hall of Fame. People say, well, he had a good year in 1961. He hit 61 home runs, broke a record that was never supposed to be broken, and they treated it like, oh, that was an okay year he had. But he had three straight great years, including in 1962 when he had the most the worst press in the history of baseball. The reporters just detested this guy, and the UPI voted him the flop of the year. The only time they ever took this survey, just so they could give it to Roger Maris. It was treated just awfully, and he had just terrible relationships with the press over the time he spent in New York, and he uh, he never mended fences with the people who would vote on the Hall of Fame. So for 5 years, and I include this in the book, for 5 years that he played with the Yankees and played with the hero of the Yankees, Mickey Mantle, who was his best friend on the Yankees. Um, they had almost exactly the same statistics. They were a twosome, and they were both great players. And I've always been someone in arguing for people in the hall to get in the Hall of Fame. People are just pointing out stats and cherry pick and whatever. But during the playing days when Roger Maris was on the Yankees, and even before, even his beginning of his rookie year at Cleveland in '57 and in '59, when he made his first All Star team with Kansas City and led the league in hitting for a while, we called him great. We referred to him as a great player. McCarver said he was even a Hall of Famer in St. Louis, even if he didn't hit 61 homers, which he never liked to talk about because he was very modest. He wasn't somebody to boast his way into the Hall of Fame. Um, he was somebody we looked at and we said, this guy's going to be in the Hall of Fame because he's that good. I like you. I wanted to point out something. You keep showing Gabriel. You keep showing Roger Maris coming around the bases after his 61st homer.
Indeed.
Can you show that again?
Yep.
Show that again. Oh, if you go back farther, it's very important to go back farther. Go back to where when he hits the homer. Look at the shadow. He's running to first base in a shadow. And this is like a visual metaphor. He runs to first base. Sal Durante's catching the ball in the stands in right field as Roger Maris is running out of the shadows he finally got the burden off his back. It's visual, and he's in the sunshine, and he's flying around the bases, and he finally feels well. He did it. He did the impossible. He broke Babe Ruth's record despite fans rooting against him, throwing things at him, and the reporters just saying how he and Mantle were feuding, although they were best friends and living together, and just relentless reporters just asking him question after question, and the commissioner of baseball being against him and wanting to put an asterisk next to his 61 homers if he broke the record after 154 games, which is when Babe Ruth did it in 1927. So I love that coming around first base out of the shadows and into the sunshine, and that's it makes me happy seeing that always.
That was wonderfully said, and I never really watched that footage with that in mind before, but you can see that, I mean, it's not a traditional home run trot by any means. He's definitely going at a little bit of an accelerated
No,
speed, and it must be the burden of 1,000,000 pounds lifting off him in that moment.
unbelievable. The people ask me what the greatest thing Roger Maris did, and they say, he hit 61 homers. He did two things that year. He had 24 homers in 38 games, which is like what Aaron Judge is kind of doing. But the one thing, he had 10 home runs in September. And remember, Gabriel mentioned how he had slumps every year. He just awful slump. He had a terrible slump in September, and he couldn't hit anything. And that he was able to will himself to hit 10 home runs and break the record despite not having any notion of how to hit the ball. And he's losing his hair that month. He had to take a day off and go to the zoo with his wife. Just the burden he had, and to manage to hit 10 home runs, and including the one on the final day of the season off Tracy Stellar to break the record. Just that's what I think is the greatest accomplishment. That to hit 10 home runs in a month when you couldn't hit anything.
Well, Danny, thank you so much for being here. I want to keep you for forever, but I do technically have to stop the stream at some point and go back to doing
Well,
other
thank you
things.
so much. Talking to someone in Fargo on Roger Maris's birthday is 90th birthday is a really treat for me, and I really appreciate your asking me.
Well, before I let you go, people should know, even though your co-author graciously and I think accurately described you as one of the greatest baseball minds that he's ever encountered, you do have a lot of other writings. You've done writings on movies specifically. So is there anything else that you have in the fire or anything else that you'd like to plug before I let you go?
No, the only thing I plug, because a lot of my books are out of print, because I'm semi-retired. I am working on a secret project for someone else, but in movie related, is I have ebooks. Those who never go out of print because they're ebooks. So I'm known in movie circles for these cult movie series, and these ebooks are taken. I did three cult movie books with 200 titles, and they're ebooks that take out various chapters and put them into genres. So with Halloween coming up, there's a horror ebook that I think people should seek out.
All right. I have no problem pointing people in that
That's it.
direction because this has been so tremendous, and I really appreciate your time. And I don't know. I told Tom that he's got 2025 locked down because he was busy this time around and he couldn't do the interview. But maybe we'll just have everyone together next time, and we'll have a big group conversation.
Well, okay.
All
I
right.
look for
Well.
it. Well, that'll be Roger's 91st birthday.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, hey, everyone, thanks so much for tuning in on this. We could have done a lot more even and gone super deep on the 61, but I wanted to really touch on all the things that Roger did in his childhood and all the connections to this area. So I thought this conversation was extremely enlightening, and I hope you did too. We're coming up really rapidly now on the 4 o'clock evening broadcast. Make sure you switch over to our regular broadcast channels for that so you can see Bobby Fowlett there and all the things that we have going on for the rest of the day. But for right now, happy birthday to Roger Maris. Thanks so much for joining me, and we'll see you next time.